Hello, everybody. It's now 4 o'clock, but I think we should give someone, well, give 2 minutes for people to settle down, and then we'll begin properly. Well, comrades and friends, I think we can begin the meeting now. First thing I'd like to do is introduce myself. My name is Rob Sewell, and I'm the editor of Socialist Appeal in Britain. And a founding member of the International Marxist Tendency. And I've been asked to moderate, to chair this particular historic meeting. I'd like to welcome those who are watching from all over the world. And are going to participate in this key meeting of the International Marxist Tendency. Today, the 20th of August, is the exact day that marks the 80th anniversary of the assassination of Leon Trotsky. But this meeting has been called to commemorate the life of Leon Trotsky and also to celebrate his ideas. For your information, this meeting will be translated via Discord into 8 different languages. And that's the reason for me pausing to allow time for translation. For those interested in finding out details of the translation, they can be found at the following address. That's at www.marxist.com slash Trotsky 2020. We thought that a fitting opening to such an historic meeting would be to show the documentary of the life of Leon Trotsky. Such a documentary was produced by the IMT in 2017. It's called Leon Trotsky, The Life of a Revolutionary. And it was produced to mark the centenary of the Russian Revolution itself. The documentary has been subtitled in a whole number of languages. It will be shown in English and in Spanish. But for those who want to listen in a different language, then they should go to marxist.com/Trotsky 2020 for details. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the documentary, The Life of Leon Trotsky.
Here, beneath this simple grey stone monument, adorned only with the symbol of the hammer and sickle, lie the mortal remains of one of the greatest revolutionary leaders in history. Here was the man who, together with Lenin, led the Russian workers and peasants to power in the October Revolution of 1917. Here was the man who almost single-handedly organized the Russian Red Army from scratch to defeat 21 armies of foreign intervention, thus saving the young Soviet Republic from sure disaster. And above all, here in Coyoacán was the man who led a ferocious and stubborn struggle against Russian Stalinism in defense of the authentic traditions of Bolshevism, Leninism, and the October Revolution. I refer to that great man known to us as Lev Davidovich Trotsky. Leon Trotsky began his revolutionary activity when he was only 18 years of age. This was a time when the Russian working class was entering into a stormy period of strikes that anticipated the revolution. In his autobiography, Trotsky describes how he would work late into the night, writing agitational leaflets in his best handwriting, which would then be distributed to the factory workers. This work was quite successful, but soon drew the attention of the authorities. Trotsky was arrested, imprisoned, and sent to Siberia, from where he escaped and went to London, where for the first time he met with Lenin. One morning in 1902, Trotsky turned up on Lenin's doorstep in London. At the time, Lenin was working on Iskra, a new Marxist newspaper, around which he was attempting to unite the scattered forces of the Russian workers' movement on a revolutionary platform. The work of Iskra was enormously successful, but at the Second Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party in 1903, a split occurred which subsequently hardened into the Bolshevik and Menshevik tendencies. In the beginning, the reasons for this split were not clear even to Lenin. Only after the Congress, in the course of 1904, did important political differences emerge, mainly on the attitude towards the bourgeois liberals. On this central question, Trotsky broke with the Mensheviks and remained formally outside both factions until 1917. However, throughout all this period, on all the main political questions, Trotsky always stood closer to the Bolsheviks, as Lenin himself recognized. On the 9th of January 1905, a peaceful mass demonstration of workers, led by a priest, went to present a petition to the Tsar. The demonstration was met by a hail of bullets from the forces of order. This marked the beginning of the first Russian Revolution of 1905, in which Leon Trotsky played an outstanding role. Still only 26 years of age, Trotsky was elected chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet, the revolutionary organ that led the Russian masses against Tsarism. After the defeat of the 1905 revolution, Trotsky was again arrested and put on trial, together with the other leaders of the Soviet. From the prisoner's dock, Trotsky turned the trial into a defense of the revolution and a daring attack against the Tsarist regime. He was once again sentenced to imprisonment and sent to Siberia, from which, once again, he escaped. The years following the defeat of 1905 revolution were years of black reaction, with mass imprisonment of revolutionaries, hangings, shootings, and punitive expeditions in the villages to crush the revolution with savage brutality. The great Soviet film director Sergei Eisenstein famously depicts the brutal reaction of the Tsarist regime against the workers. Having escaped from Siberia, Trotsky went to Vienna, where he established a very successful workers' paper called Pravda. The paper became very popular with the workers of Russia because of its clear revolutionary message and popular style of writing. By 1911, the Russian workers had recovered from the defeat and were again moving into action. Mass strikes, protests and demonstrations became widespread. But in 1914, this new revolutionary movement was cut across by the outbreak of the First World War. Although the Second International had pledged itself in repeated congresses to oppose imperialist war, when the war was finally declared, Every single party of the Second International, with the exception of the Russians and the Serbs, betrayed the cause of internationalism and supported the war credits. When Lenin received a copy of the German Social Democratic newspaper Vorwärts, announcing its support for the war, at first he did not believe it, saying that it was a forgery of the German General Staff to discredit the social democracy. Trotsky had exactly the same reaction. But once Lenin realized that it was true, he did not hesitate to pronounce the death of the Second International and proclaimed the need for the new Communist International. Like Lenin, Trotsky took up an international position on the question of the war. In 1915, when the small forces of proletarian internationalism regrouped in the little Swiss village of Zimmerwald, it was Trotsky who wrote the manifesto. From Paris, Trotsky published a daily newspaper, Naše Slovo, which defended internationalism and opposed the imperialist war. For this, Trotsky was expelled from France and ended up in New York, where he collaborated with Bukharin and other exiled revolutionaries in publishing the newspaper Novi Mir. Despite tremendous difficulties, gradually the workers began to recover from the poisonous fumes of chauvinism and nationalism. In the trenches and factories, the mood was turning rapidly against the war. From his exile in Switzerland, Lenin heard the unexpected news of the February Revolution that had overthrown the Tsar. He sent repeated telegrams to the Bolsheviks in Petrograd, advocating no trust in Kerensky and the provisional government, and demanding that the workers should take power into their own hands through the Soviets. But the Bolshevik leaders in Russia were unprepared for the revolution and were carried away by the pressure of bourgeois public opinion. They refused to publish Lenin's articles in Pravda and even advocated unity with the Mensheviks and support for the provisional government. On his return to Russia, Lenin had to wage a struggle against Kamenev, Stalin and others, appealing to the workers to push the Bolshevik party back onto the revolutionary road. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in New York, Trotsky was publishing articles in Novi Mir putting exactly the same position as Lenin. Nowadays, nobody seriously questions the leading role played by Leon Trotsky in the October Revolution of 1917. One can safely say that without the presence of two men, Lenin and Trotsky, that revolution would never have taken place. The likes of Kamenev, Zinoviev, and Stalin capitulated to pressure and opposed the workers taking power. Lenin and Trotsky, by contrast, maintained a firm revolutionary line on the basis of the slogan, "All power to the Soviets." As a result of their correct policies, slogans, and tactics, the Bolsheviks won over the overwhelming majority of the workers and peasants in the Soviets. This is the explanation as to why the October Revolution was practically a bloodless affair, at least in Petrograd. Even Stalin in 1918 was forced to state that all practical work in connection with the organization of the uprising was done under the immediate direction of Comrade Trotsky, the president of the Petrograd Soviet. It can be stated with certainty that the party is indebted primarily and principally to Comrade Trotsky for the rapid going over of the garrison to the side of the Soviet and the efficient manner in which the work of the Military Revolutionary Committee was organized. So great was the prestige enjoyed by Trotsky at that time that the Bolshevik Party was universally known as the party of Lenin-Trotsky. The October Revolution itself was accomplished with a minimum of violence. The real sea of blood occurred afterwards in the Civil War, when the Soviet Republic was invaded by 21 armies of foreign intervention. The revolution at this moment was defenseless. The old army had disintegrated completely, and it was Trotsky who organized the Red Army, starting virtually from nothing, and led it to victory. Trotsky traveled from one end of Russia to the other in his famous armored train that contained not only rifles and ammunition, but also a library, cinema, books, and propaganda. Under Trotsky's leadership, the Red Army waged war not only with guns, but also with ideas. The Bolsheviks distributed propaganda in foreign languages to great effect among the interventionist forces, with the result that there were mutinies in every single one of them, forcing the imperialists to withdraw from Russia. The Russian Revolution was saved in a critical moment when its fate was hanging in the balance, and Trotsky's role in this was absolutely crucial. Commentating on this in a conversation with the writer Maxim Gorky, Lenin at one point explains, "Show me another man," he said, thumping the table, "capable of organizing in 1 year an almost exemplary army and moreover of winning the esteem of the military specialists." The Bolsheviks took power in Russia with the perspective that their revolution would only be the first step in the socialist revolution in Europe and the rest of the world. But the betrayal of the German Revolution of 1918 by the Social Democrats meant that the Russian Revolution found itself isolated in conditions of frightful economic and cultural backwardness. This was what inevitably led to the bureaucratic degeneration of the revolution. A caste of privileged officials gradually elevated itself above the working class and concentrated power into its own hands. At the head of this new caste stood Joseph Stalin. Stalin had played an insignificant role in the revolution itself, but rose to a position of power in its period of ebb. After Lenin's death in 1924, a bureaucratic faction in the party crystallized around Stalin and his supporters. Trotsky attempted to defend the authentic ideas of Bolshevism and the October Revolution but was faced with a difficult situation. The workers were tired, hungry, and exhausted. The bureaucracy, on the other hand, felt itself more and more confident, elbowing the workers to one side and grabbing power in the state and the party. The opposition was defeated, and Trotsky was expelled and sent into exile.
Europe, in general, has ceased to be the center of the world. It is foolish to hope that Europe, as it is, will again occupy that position.
Stalin miscalculated when he exiled Trotsky to Turkey, believing that he could do nothing without an apparatus. From exile, Trotsky continued his fight to preserve the genuine traditions of October. With a small band of collaborators, he organized the international left opposition. Trotsky sought in vain to find refuge in one country after another, but was refused. In the word of the French writer André Breton, this was the planet without a visa. Finally, he found a refuge in Mexico, from where he continued his struggle, one man against the entire world. Stalin's purges were a one-sided civil war against Bolshevism. Not satisfied with the murder of the leaders of Lenin's party, Stalin took his revenge on the families of his opponents. One by one, Trotsky saw his comrades, friends, and family and children fall victim to the most powerful and ruthlessly efficient murder machine in history. Yet he refused to be silenced.
Stalin's trial against me is built upon false confessions, extorted by modern inquisitorial methods in the interest of the ruling clique. There are no crime in history more terrible in intention and execution than the Moscow trials of Zinoviev Kamenev and the of Petakov Radek. His trials developed not from communism, not from socialism, but from Stalinism, that is, from the irresponsible despotism of the bureaucracy over the people.
Trotsky spent his final years in Mexico from 1937 until his death in 1940. I met with Esteban Volkov, Trotsky's grandson, who was a long-term friend of mine. Esteban lived with Trotsky here in Coyoacán and is today the director of the Trotsky Museum in Mexico. He told me about Leon Trotsky's final years.
Llegamos aquí a México en agosto de 1939, procedente de París. Llegué con el matrimonio Rosmer. Fue un cambio radical de vivir en París, en un ambiente de desolación, con la viuda de Leon Jean Martin, y llegar a esta familia llena de calor, como era la casa aquí con el abuelo, Natalia, rodeado de puros jóvenes. Fue un cambio radical, ¿sí? Y muy grato además, ¿no? Un país lleno de color. Y empecé a ir a la escuela también, sin hablar una palabra de español. Y lo que sí viví y comprendí y sentí fue toda esa campaña de calumnias y difamaciones que había contra el abuelo, ¿no? La prensa stalinista de México, como era el Popular, Futuro, el Machete, La Voz de México. Cargos absurdos, ¿no? Agente de Hitler, agente del Mikado. Y luego cuando vino el pacto Stalin-Hitler, ya automáticamente cambió la filiación de Trotsky, ¿verdad? Ya no espiaba para Alemania, sino espiaba para el Deuxième Bureau de Francia o para Estados Unidos. Sí, no, pues fue un cambio muy grato, Y yo me hice un poco adicto a la adrenalina, ¿no? Esa atmósfera aquí en la casa, movimiento con las pistolas y guardias todos moviéndose. Y en el día, pues yo iba a la escuela, llevaba una doble vida, vaya. Un día mi vida tranquila en la escuela y luego ya regresaba aquí a la casa.
This is a photograph of Robert Sheldon Hart, a young American who joined the Guard here in April 1940. Unknown to anybody except himself, Robert Sheldon Hart was an agent of Stalin's GPU. Here, for the first time, Trotsky's household was directly infiltrated by a Stalinist agent.
Pero en enero de 1940 se observó una intensificación muy fuerte de la racha de calumnias y de los ataques de la prensa stalinista. Llegó un paroxismo, ¿verdad? Y fue cuando el abuelo, con la fina ironía que tenía siempre, dijo: parece que los periodistas están a punto de cambiar la pluma por la ametralladora.
In the early hours of the 24th of May 1940, the silence of this place was shattered by the sound of automatic machine gun fire. A group of armed men, led by David Siqueiros, the Mexican painter and Stalinist agent, penetrated this place through a door that had been left open by the Stalinist agent Sheldon Hart. They stormed this part of the building where the Trotsky family lay quietly asleep in their beds, spraying it with bullets. You can see here in the wall, still quite visible, the mark of the impact of numerous bullets fired by the assailants. According to the calculations of the Mexican police investigation that subsequently was held, at least 300 bullets were fired, of which 73 were fired inside this building, into which the assailants penetrated through these very doors.
Yo primero pensé que era alguno de los camaradas, no alguno de los guardias secretarios, ¿no? Pero no. A los breves segundos empezaron las ráfagas de ametralladora, ¿verdad? Realmente no es una sensación muy grata, ¿no? Estar durmiendo en la cama y de repente que lo transporten a uno a la mitad de un campo de batalla, ¿no? Sí, son momentos que parecen eternos, ¿verdad? Ráfagas y ráfagas, olor a pólvora, flamazos, y me tiré al suelo y me arrinconé, ¿verdad? Y también, es decir, ametrallaron la recámara de los abuelos desde 3 ángulos, desde el jardín, la ventana del jardín, desde el despacho y desde la puerta de mi recámara. En las 3 direcciones acribillaron la recámara. Gracias a los rápidos reflejos de Natalia, salvaron a ambos sus vidas, ¿sí? Porque Natalia, a los primeros disparos, empujó al abuelo fuera de la cama y lo empujó hacia el rincón más oscuro del cuarto. Y tras de momentos que parecían eternos, ¿verdad?, de repente ya volvió un silencio sepulcral a la casa, ¿no? Pero en ese momento alguien abrió la puerta, es decir, se asomó por la puerta del jardín y oí la palabra, ahí están las bombas. Entonces el que había entrado, el atacante que había disparado desde mi recámara, tomó los frascos, pero yo en ese momento, al oír la palabra bomba, salí de mi escondite y huí hacia el jardín, ¿sí? Porque pensé que la casa iba a volar en 1000 pedazos. Y fue cuando percibí un ardor en el pulgar del pie derecho, porque tenía yo una cortada profunda al resultado de un impacto de bala, ¿no? En sedal. Y alcancé a gritar todavía, ¿no? Abuelos, como pues queriendo alertarlos, ¿no? Del peligro que había, ¿no? Pero afortunadamente esas bombas no eran explosivas, la casa no voló en pedazos, eran bombas incendiarias que sí estallaron y hicieron una gran llamarada en la casa, ¿no? En la recámara donde yo dormía. Y después, pues como decía el abuelo, esa fue la tarjeta de visita de Stalin. Porque la idea de los atacantes eran que los dos grandes armarios que estaban en la recámara, en mi recámara, contenían los documentos, los archivos de Trotsky. Y solo a Stalin le podía interesar quemar y destruir esos archivos. Pues después supo, ¿no? Natalia rápidamente se apresuró y con franelas, con trapos, con lo que pudo encontrar, logró apagar las llamas, se quemó un poco el brazo. Y después, bueno, yo corrí hacia la biblioteca y salí por atrás, donde estaban los cuartos de los guardias, y me metí al cuarto de Harold Robbins, y ahí estuve. Y al poco tiempo se oyó la voz del abuelo, lleno de vida, esto que... Y nos reunimos alrededor de él. Y era impresionante el grado de euforia, ¿verdad?, que manifestaba el abuelo de haberse salvado de ese atentado, ¿no? Todavía entró una llamada telefónica en la madrugada y él pensó que eran posiblemente los mismos estalinistas que querían saber o indagar algo sobre y pues él se puso en el teléfono y les profirió insultos y toda una andanada ahí de palabras sueces. Y todavía creo que también alcanzó a disparar sobre una silueta que corría por el río atrás de la casa. En aquel tiempo los muros eran más bajos y se alcanzaba a tener una vista del canal, ¿no? Y al poco tiempo, pues sí, nos reunimos todos y empezaron comentarios y todo, en fin, de todo lo que había sucedido. Pero sí también nos dimos cuenta que uno de los guardias, Sheldon Hart, había desaparecido, ¿no?, con los asaltantes, y pues eso sí creó cierta atmósfera así de inquietud, ¿no? Finalmente sí, la policía logró detener a uno de los participantes del asalto y entonces ya se descubrió toda la trama, ¿no? Y fueron hasta agarrar a Siqueiros, que estaba allá no sé por dónde, en la sierra de Chihuahua, por allá escondido. Pero el abuelo sabía que esto solo era una tregua, que en un plazo breve vendría otro atentado. Tras del atentado del 24 de mayo, el Socialist Worker Party, el grupo trotskista de Estados Unidos, hizo colectas y se logró comprar la casa y además se iniciaron obras de fortificación, ¿verdad? Se levantaron muros, se pusieron los garitones, se pusieron planchas, es decir, persianas de hierro en las ventanas, se achicaron también las puertas, también con puertas blindadas. Pero el abuelo era muy escéptico sobre estos aprestos, estos preparativos. Él sabía que no se iba a repetir el mismo atentado, que sería de otro tipo. Y la incógnita era por dónde vendría ese atentado, ¿no? Todas las mañanas, según narra Natalia, ¿verdad?, cuando despertaban y Natalia abría las persianas, decía: Natacha, nos han dado un día más de vida. Y finalmente, como sabemos, ¿verdad?, el 24 de mayo, un agente de la GPU, un catalán, ¿verdad?, hábilmente logró, ¿verdad?, pues, acercarse aquí a la casa. Inicialmente enamoró una trotskista y siempre se mantuvo totalmente al margen del abuelo, que no le interesaba la política, en fin, jugó un papel muy hábil.
On that day, the 20th of August, 1940, when this great man, this great proletarian revolutionist, sitting at this table, reading an article which allegedly had been written by this Jackson, this Ramon Mercader, to give him his real name, this Stalinist agent, standing behind this man, this defenseless man, reading an article, produced from his gabardine, from his raincoat, an ice pick with the handle shortened, and struck Trotsky in the head, treacherously, cowardly, from behind.
Desde lejos, cuando yo regresaba a la escuela, noté que algo raro estaba pasando frente a la casa, ¿no? Porque normalmente las tardes eran muy tranquilas aquí en Viena 19, no había ninguna actividad, un remanso de paz. Pero en esa ocasión, ¿no?, desde varias calles, yo vi que algo extraño estaba sucediendo. Había unos policías en la puerta del garage abierta de par en par. Estaba un coche también mal estacionado, invadiendo la calle. Y sí, me entró una fuerte angustia. Dije: algo grave está pasando. Yo apresuré la marcha y entrando a la casa, luego me topé con el camarada Harold Robbins, que estaba en un grado máximo de excitación, con la Colt 38 en la mano. Y le pregunté: ¿qué pasa? ¿Qué pasa? Y solo me exclamó: Jackson, Jackson. Pues yo de momento no entendí qué estaba sucediendo. Y me encaminé a la biblioteca y en el recodo de ese pasillo, del jardín, sí vi un individuo con la cara ensangrentada, que sujetaban dos policías, que chillaba y aullaba como una rata entrampada, ¿no? Y siempre he tenido esa imagen, ¿no?, tan presente, ¿no?, de lo que eran los verdugos de la GPU, al lado de los trotskistas de Vorkuta, ¿verdad?, que morían bajo las balas, ¿verdad?, cantando la Internacional y proclamando vivas a Trotsky y a Lenin, ¿no? Y esos mismos eran los que los asesinaban, ¿no?, en esos campos de concentración, sí. Esos eran los héroes estalinistas. Pues proseguí mi marcha y entré a la biblioteca y por la puerta entreabierta vi al abuelo en el suelo, ¿verdad?, la cabeza ensangrentada, Natalia aplicándole hielo y había dos camaradas, creo que era, si no mal recuerdo, Johansen y ¿quién más? Y Charlie Cornell estaban también al lado. Luego me contaron, ¿verdad?, que el abuelo, al oír mis pasos, señaló hacia la puerta con dificultad: alejen al niño, tengan al niño alejado, así alejado, no debe de ver esta escena. Con anterioridad también, según narraban los camaradas, cuando oyó los quejidos del asesino, que estaba todavía en el despacho, inmovilizado por uno de los guardias, también indicó: no lo maten, debe hablar. Y pues sí, Trotsky cayó en las trincheras de la revolución socialista. Trotsky no era hombre a morir de vejez en la cama. Y pues él mismo en ocasión comentó, ¿verdad?, que cuando un hombre ha cumplido su misión en la vida, la muerte no es ningún problema. Y considero que Trotsky pues ha cumplido su misión, ¿verdad?, con creces, ¿no? Y sí, nos ha dejado pues un gigantesco arsenal marxista, ¿verdad?, que enriquece, pues sí, todo el acervo que existe para que los explotados, ¿verdad?, del planeta puedan luchar por un mundo mejor, ¿verdad?, donde se radica esa explotación tan despiadada y extrema en que está actualmente la humanidad, sí.
Today, 100 years after the October Revolution and 25 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the enemies of socialism tried to maintain that the Russian Revolution achieved nothing, that it was all a disaster, which it would have been better to avoid. This is entirely false. The October Revolution overthrew a monstrously oppressive and corrupt regime, opening the way to tremendous material and cultural progress. The Russian Revolution demonstrated, not in the language of dialectics or the 3 volumes of Marx's Capital, but in the language of steel, cement, electricity, and space rockets, that it is possible to run the economy of a gigantic subcontinent without private capitalists, landlords, and bankers, and to obtain the most remarkable results. History has never seen such a colossal transformation as the one that changed a formerly backward, illiterate, semi-feudal country, such as Tsarist Russia was in 1917, into a powerful industrial economy with an educated population and a huge number of doctors, teachers, scientists, and engineers that were the envy of the world. It is true that under incredibly difficult material conditions, the Russian Revolution eventually succumbed to bureaucratic degeneration that ultimately led to its destruction. Trotsky pointed out that a planned economy needs democracy as the human body requires oxygen. Only under a system of democratic workers' control and management can a socialist planned economy succeed. But the crimes of Stalinism cannot eradicate the fact that the USSR demonstrated to the entire world the enormous potential of a socialist planned economy. At a time when the capitalist economy is in crisis everywhere, when the collapse of 2008 finally exposed the bankruptcy of the so-called free market economy, it is time to revive the idea of a planned economy as the only way to carry humanity out of the present crisis and raise it to a qualitatively higher level. In the year 2017, the ideas of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and above all that great revolutionary and martyr of the working class, Leon Trotsky, are a powerful source of inspiration to the new generation and a shining beacon for the future of humankind.
Well, comrades, I think you'll agree that that is an amazing documentary. Which covers the whole spectrum of Trotsky's life from a young age to his assassination. And it was Esteban who made the point in the documentary that Trotsky left behind an enormous arsenal of Marxist literature. And that connects me really quite effectively to the next point I want to make, which was an offer today from well-read books. Because if you go to well-read today, you'll get a 25% discount on all books by Leon Trotsky. So this is a great opportunity to expand your library. I believe the image is on the screen now. Just to stress the point, it's wellreadbooks.net. So if you go there today, you'll get the 25% discount. Now, the documentary itself illuminated the fact that Trotsky was driven from one country to another. From Turkey to France, then to Norway, and then to Mexico. And he arrived in Mexico in January 1937. And it was from Mexico that he launched this campaign against the Moscow trials. And set up a commission of inquiry into the trials, a defense committee. And it is one of the few times that Trotsky spoke in English and gave a film recording about these trials. Therefore, we think that this is also a very fitting film to show during this commemoration meeting. So let's hear Trotsky speaking directly to you in English.
Toma uno. Esteemed audience, you will easily understand if I begin my short address to you in my very imperfect English by addressing my warm thanks to the Mexican people and to the man who leads them with such merit and courage, President Cardenas. When monstrous and absurd accusations were hurled at me and my family, when my wife and myself were under the lock and key of the Norwegian government, without being able to defend ourselves, the Mexican government opened the doors of his magnificent country and said to us, here you can freely defend your rights and your honor. Naturally, it is not a sympathy for myself, my ideas, which has motivated President Cardenas, but a fidelity to his own ideas. All the more meritorious, then, is his act of democratic hospitality, so rare these days. Stalin's trial against me is built upon false confessions, extorted by modern inquisitorial methods in the interest of the ruling clique. There are no crime in history more terrible in intention and execution than the Moscow trials of Zinoviev Kamenev and of Pyatakov-Radek. His trials developed not from communism, not from socialism, but from Stalinism, that is, from the irresponsible despotism of the bureaucracy over the people. What is now my principal task? To reveal the truth, to show and to demonstrate that the true criminals hide under the cloak of the accusers. What will be the next step in this direction? The creation of an American and European and subsequently also an international commission of inquiry composed of people who incontestably enjoy authority and public consideration. In confidence, I undertake to present to such a commission all my files, thousands of personal and open letters, in which the developments of my thought and my action is reflected day by day without any gaps. I have nothing to hide. Dozens of witnesses who are abroad possess invaluable facts and documents which will shed light on the Moscow frame-ups. The work of the Commission of Inquiry must terminate in a great counter-trial. A counter-trial is necessary to cleanse the atmosphere of the germs of deceit, calumny, falsification, and frame-ups whose source is Stalin's police, the GPU, which has fallen to the level of the Nazi Gestapo. Esteemed audience, you may have many varying attitude toward my ideas and my political activity for 40 years, but an impartial inquiry will confirm that there is not a stain on my honor, both personal and political. Profoundly convinced that the right is on my side, I wholeheartedly salute the citizens of the New World.
Well, I think that film of Trotsky shows his courage and energy, really, in fighting the counter-revolution of the Stalinists. But next, I'd like to show you a further video message, but this time from Esteban Volkov. Not only Trotsky's grandson, but also the director of the Trotsky Museum in Mexico. Who has spent decades really fighting for the integrity of Trotsky. So let's hear from Esteban.
Hoy en día vemos en cantidad de medios hablan de la derrota del comunismo, que el comunismo se acabó, que el comunismo. ¿En qué se basan para decir eso? Se basan en el falso letrero que asumió Stalin, ¿verdad?, de designarse como Partido Comunista, como Patria Comunista, a la Rusia, a la Unión Soviética que él dirigía. Y obviamente al capitalismo le interesa, más que nadie, avalar esa mentira para que en la conciencia colectiva quede la imagen, ¿verdad?, que el comunismo es gulag, son las sangrientas purgas de millones de personas. Y ese es un gran engaño, vaya. Un inmenso engaño, porque no tiene absolutamente nada de comunista. El régimen que encabezó Stalin era la antítesis del comunismo. Y es donde realmente el papel de Trotsky pues, es crucial, ¿no? No hay duda hoy por hoy, ¿verdad? Que Trotsky es uno de los grandes marxistas, ¿verdad? Y el marxismo, pues, hoy por hoy también es el método científico hasta ahorita que mejor analiza, que mejor explica toda la dinámica del sistema capitalista y pues entrevé posibilidades, ¿no? Entrevé salidas a este caótico mundo en que nos ha hundido el sistema capitalista. Pues aquí desde México, desde Coyoacán, desde el Viena 19, desde el museo, desde la Casa Museo Leon Trotsky, les deseamos el mayor de los éxitos en esta celebración del 80º aniversario de la muerte del gran revolucionario que cayó asesinado por un sicario de Stalin. Pero como decía el camarada Alan Wood, se pueden matar seres humanos, pero no se pueden destruir sus ideas. Y las ideas de Trotsky siguen vivas. Sí, no, pues sí, los fundamentos marxistas, ¿verdad? Pues siempre están vigentes y son un gran faro para ir hacia adelante. Y indudablemente Leon Trotsky pues, es uno de los grandes marxistas que ha dado la humanidad y sus enseñanzas pues, son fundamentales, básicas para avanzar hacia el futuro. Y les deseo a los camaradas pues el mayor de los éxitos en este acontecimiento, en este evento de celebración de los 80 años de la celebración luctuosa de los 80 años de desaparición del compañero de Lenin, del gran tribuno, del gran dirigente de la Revolución Rusa.
Well, I would like to thank Esteban for that message, which was extremely appreciated. And on behalf of everybody listening, I'd like to also pay tribute to him, to salute his work in defending the ideas of Trotsky over so many years. But in addition to the video message, we received this morning a written message from Esteban, which I'd like to read out. It says, "Dearest Alan and Anna, in the place that today is the Leon Trotsky House Museum, the Institute of Asylum Rights, 80 years ago, on the 20th of August, 1940, the indomitable and heroic Marxist revolutionary Leon Trotsky fell in the trenches of the socialist revolution in the struggle against one of the most ruthless and bloody tyrannies known in history. such as the counter-revolutionary, usurper, Bonapartist regime headed by Joseph Jogaishvili, better known as Joseph Stalin. As custodian and director, with the vital and very generous support of our legal director, Gabriel Perez Noriega, of the aforementioned historical site, currently closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I send a fraternal and warm greeting to all the revolutionaries who follow his, that is Trotsky's, valuable teachings and example. The fruit of more than 40 years of highly outstanding revolutionary struggle. On his part, under the Marxist banner. Primarily his crucial and prominent role alongside Lenin in the Russian Revolution. Among those who today follow his teachings most earnestly and faithfully, without the slightest doubt, are the comrades of the International Marxist Tendency. Leon Trotsky is the beacon to get out of the barbarism of ferocious and insatiable capitalism. Which is destroying our planet. And also the beacon to go forward to another world where peace, justice, and equality prevail, and human life becomes an extraordinary experience and adventure beyond imagination. Signed, Esteban Volkov, Mexico, the 20th of August, 2020. Esteban also sent us a very important audio message, given the critical situation facing the museum in Mexico. This is an appeal to you, and we ask you to listen carefully to what Esteban has to say.
Camaradas, amigas y amigos, les manda un muy atento saludo el director general del museo, Esteban Volkov. Estamos pasando por momentos muy difíciles con el COVID-19 y requerimos pues todo el apoyo de todos los camaradas y amigos para preservar este valioso lugar histórico donde hace 80 años cayó en la lucha revolucionaria el marxista Leon Davidovich Bronstein. Afortunadamente, muchos camaradas siguen sus valiosas enseñanzas, sus valiosas ideas, y pues que son más vivas, más vivos que nunca.
For nearly 5 months now, that's since the beginning of March of this year, the Leon Trotsky House Museum has been closed due to the pandemic. And this has had very serious consequences, because a significant part of the museum's income from ticket sales, cafeteria, shop, and so on has dried up. And this has put an enormous strain on the museum's ability even to continue. Now, the museum is a legacy, really, for us. It's where Leon Trotsky and Natalia worked up until the assassination of Trotsky. And it has been an important resource in defending the heritage of Trotsky and the ideas of Trotsky over many years. But under these harsh conditions, the very future of the museum is at stake. The IMT have already made a donation to the museum. And therefore, we are asking you, comrades, friends, supporters, to also make a contribution, a generous contribution towards keeping this museum going. The details of how to make a donation should be appearing on the screen. I'd just like to underline the link, which is at www.marxist.com. /support-Trotsky-museum. And this is the address that you can make all the donation directly to the museum itself. So, given Esteban's appeal and given the importance of the museum, I will hope that you will give generously in order to ensure that this place can be continued for the foreseeable future. I'm pleased to say that this has been a really or truly an international meeting from all parts of the world. We've had comrades and friends watching from Canada to Chile, from the United States to China, from Lebanon to Russia, and from Denmark to South Africa. So there's been a whole host of countries from all the continents of the world who have participated in this meeting. But the next point on the agenda is to introduce the highlight, I would say, of the meeting. That is to introduce Comrade Alan Woods, who is renowned for, as the most important Marxist theoretician internationally. The author of many Marxist classics, including many articles on Marxism and Trotsky itself. So without further ado, I'd like to call on Alan to address the meeting.
When we consider the extraordinary life of an extraordinary man, such as Lev Davidovich Trotsky,
cuando consideramos la vida y la obra de un hombre de la talla de Leon Trotsky,
one can only conclude that here is a life which contains more in it than could fill the biographies of any number of historical figures.
Vemos que aquí en su vida hay más que suficiente de actividad que podría llenar la biografía de grandes o de importantes figuras históricas.
Dramatic achievements like leading the October Revolution,
Impresionantes logros como dirigir la Revolución de Octubre,
which for us is the greatest event in human history,
que para nosotros es el acontecimiento más grande de la historia,
or the creation of the Red Army from nothing,
o la creación del Ejército Rojo a partir de la nada,
leading it to victory against incredible odds in the Civil War.
y llevándolo a la victoria en contra de, o sea, con todo en contra en una guerra, la guerra civil.
These alone would be more than could be accomplished by most people in several lifetimes.
Esto por sí solo es mucho más que lo que podría conseguirse en muchas vidas juntas, o sea, no en una sola vida, pero necesitando muchas.
These were all important dramatic events that have captured the imagination of many people.
Estos son acontecimientos que han capturado la mente de mucha gente.
Yet Trotsky himself always insisted that the most important period in his life was none of these things, but was the last 10 years which he spent in exile.
No obstante, el propio Trotsky siempre dijo que el periodo más importante de su vida no fue durante estos acontecimientos, sino los últimos 10 años que los pasó en exilio.
Some people have doubted this, but those people are very wrong.
Alguna gente tiene dudas de esto, pero están equivocados.
Here is the real drama and the culmination of Trotsky's entire life.
Aquí está el auténtico drama y la culminación de los grandes logros de Trotsky.
Here is his last great battle and also his greatest achievement.
Aquí está
The last great battle and his last great achievement.
Es que me han cortado, Jordi, no sé qué ha pasado. ¿No se me oye?
Problems with the translation, just a minute.
¿No se me oye? Lo que está pasando. ¿No se me oye?
Anna, we cannot hear you, but you should continue translating, please.
Okay.
Here is the real drama of Trotsky's life.
Aquí está el auténtico drama de la vida de Trotsky,
his last great battle,
la gran batalla, última batalla,
and also his greatest achievement.
y también sus más grandes logros.
Now, it's hard to imagine how difficult it must have been.
Es difícil imaginar lo difícil que debe haber sido.
One man against the entire world.
Un hombre en contra de todo el mundo.
Just think of it.
Pensadlo.
The entire world situation at that time was one of the blackest reactions.
La situación en aquel entonces era de la reacción más negra.
The defeat of the proletarian revolution in one country after another.
La derrota del proletariado en un país tras otro.
In Europe, the brown tide of fascist reaction was advancing inexorably.
En Europa, la marea de la reacción fascista estaba avanzando inexorablemente,
Crushing the workers under its iron heel.
aplastando a los trabajadores bajo el talón de hierro.
In Italy, in Germany, in Austria, in Spain.
En Italia, Alemania, Austria, España,
One terrible defeat after another.
una terrible derrota tras otra.
And in Russia,
Y en Rusia,
the isolation of the October Revolution under conditions of frightful backwardness.
el aislamiento de la revolución de octubre bajo condiciones de terrible atraso
Created the material conditions for the bureaucratic counter-revolution under Stalin.
creó las condiciones materiales para la contrarrevolución burocrática bajo Stalin.
And from exile, Trotsky had to watch while Stalin annihilated an entire generation of revolutionaries.
Desde el exilio, Trotsky tuvo que ver cómo Stalin aniquilaba una generación entera de revolucionarios
Destroyed the party of Lenin.
y destruía el partido de Lenin.
And here we have what looks like a paradox.
Y aquí tenemos lo que parece una paradoja.
Stalin held absolute power in the Soviet Union.
Stalin tenía el poder absoluto en la Unión Soviética,
He stood at the head of a powerful state,
estuvo a la cabeza de un poderoso Estado
and he held in his hands a vast bureaucratic apparatus and almost inexhaustible resources.
y tenía en sus manos un aparato burocrático casi y recursos casi.
Stalin controlled the most terrible murder machine that's ever been seen in history.
Stalin controlaba la más terrible máquina asesina mayor de toda la historia de la humanidad.
And yet he did not feel safe.
Y no obstante, no se sintió a salvo.
And here's the paradox.
Y aquí está la paradoja.
Why should Stalin fear one man?
¿Por qué Stalin debería miedo a de un solo hombre?
A lonely exile in faraway Mexico.
En un exiliado lejos en México.
At first sight, it seems a very difficult question to answer.
A primera vista, parece algo difícil de responder.
It's true that spitefulness and a desire for revenge undoubtedly played a role.
Es verdad que la saña y un deseo de revancha fueron elementos poderosos.
These were powerful elements in Stalin's psychological makeup.
Estos eran elementos importantes en la conformación psicológica de Stalin.
Stalin took his revenge on all those who he regarded as enemies.
Stalin se vengó de todos aquellos que consideraba sus enemigos,
Not only against them, but against their families also.
y no solo en contra de ellos, sino también sus familias.
One by one, Trotsky saw not just his friends and enemies, not just his friends and comrades murdered,
Uno por uno, Trotsky vio no solo sus amigos y compañeros asesinados,
but his children also.
sino también sus hijos.
But Stalin's persecution of Trotsky was not just a matter of personal hatred.
La persecución de Stalin, Trotsky, no era solamente una cuestión personal de él.
It was above all fear that the ideas and program of Trotsky and the Bolshevik Leninists would get an echo in the Soviet working class.
Era sobre todo un miedo a que las ideas y el programa de Trotsky consiguieron un eco entre la clase obrera soviética.
And that was not an idle fear.
Esa no era un temor en vano.
There was at the time growing discontent in the Soviet working class.
Había en ese momento un descontento creciente entre la clase obrera soviética.
Discontent at the bad conditions,
Descontentos de las malas condiciones.
and above all of the growing inequality and the privileges of the bureaucracy.
Y sobre todo por la desigualdad creciente y los privilegios de la burocracia.
And Stalin had a reason to be afraid that this could develop into something more serious.
Y Stalin tenía razón para creer que esto se podría desarrollar en algo más grave.
That's precisely why he launched the monstrous purge trials.
Y esa es la razón por la que lanzó las purgas.
A one-sided civil war against the Bolshevik Party.
Una guerra civil unilateral contra el partido bolchevique.
Yes, and then there was another reason.
Y también hubo otra razón.
Joseph Stalin was one of the biggest criminals in the whole of history.
Joseph Stalin fue uno de los mayores criminales en toda la historia.
And like all criminals, he wished to eliminate all witnesses. Trotsky was the last remaining witness. And therefore he had to be silenced. But Trotsky, the revolutionist, would not be silenced. He continued to speak out bravely, fiercely denouncing Stalin's crimes. And the dictator in the Kremlin was planning a terrible revenge against his opponent. As long ago as 1926, Zinoviev and Kamenev had warned Trotsky. They said, "You think Stalin will answer your ideas?" But Stalin will strike at your head. And that prophetic warning finally became a tragic fact. Now, it's not generally realized, but Stalin followed very closely the activities of the Trotskyists. Believe it or not, there's a clear evidence for this. That every morning Stalin had Trotsky's latest article on his desk in the Kremlin. He planted his agents in the ranks of the Trotskyists, inside and outside the Soviet Union. And one by one, Trotsky's collaborators, friends, and family were murdered. Stalinist agents in Paris murdered Trotsky's son, Leon Sedov. When he was recovering from an operation in hospital. And Leon Sedov was playing a key role in the international left opposition at that time. This was a serious blow against the Fourth International, which was still in an embryonic phase. An even crueler blow came with the arrest of Trotsky's younger son, Sergei. Sergei had stayed behind in Russia,
Sergei se había quedado en Rusia
and as he was not involved in politics, they thought that he would not be harmed.
y como no estaba implicado en la política, pensaron que él no tendría peligro.
That was a mistake.
Ese fue un error.
Sergei was arrested and disappeared into Stalin's gulag,
Sergei desapareció en los gulags de Stalin,
where he met the same terrible fate as all the other Trotskyist prisoners.
donde se encontró con el mismo destino terrible que todos los demás prisioneros trotskistas.
Incidentally, it's not generally known.
Por cierto, esto es algo que no se sabe muy generalmente.
This was such a terrible blow to Trotsky and to his wife, Sedova.
Este fue un golpe tan duro para él y para su esposa, Nathan Sedova,
That he contemplated suicide.
que pensó la idea del suicidio.
What should I do? In his diary, he writes this in his diary. What should I do?
En su diario escribe, ¿qué hago?
Should I kill myself?
¿Debería de matarme a mí mismo?
Maybe, and therefore maybe Stalin would let Sergei go free.
Y a lo mejor así Stalin perdone a Sergei.
But he knew that this was not going to be the case.
Pero él sabía que este no iba a ser el caso.
The fate of his son was sealed.
El destino de su hijo estaba sellado.
And speaking of the Trotskyist prisoners in Russia at that time,
Y hablando de los prisioneros trotskistas en Rusia en aquel momento,
we should honor the memory of those heroic men and women.
deberíamos de rendir honor a la memoria de esos hombres y mujeres heroicos
In those hellish death camps,
en esos campamentos de la muerte diabólicos.
the Trotskyists alone maintained their revolutionary discipline.
Los trotskistas mantuvieron, y solamente ellos mantuvieron su disciplina revolucionaria.
They held political discussions on the world situation.
Discusiones políticas sobre la situación mundial.
And even organized strikes to defend themselves against the worst oppression of the guards.
Organizaron huelgas para defenderse de los peores ataques de las.
And in the notorious camp at Vorkuta in the Arctic Circle,
Y en el tristemente célebre campamento de Vorkuta en el Círculo Ártico,
they even succeeded in winning a strike for better conditions.
incluso tuvieron éxito en ganar una huelga para mejorar sus condiciones.
But Stalin's response was immediate and savage.
La respuesta de Stalin fue inmediata y salvaje.
In the winter of 1937,
En el invierno de 1937,
they were taken out of the camp in groups of 10.
fueron sacados del campamento en grupos de 10,
Men, women, and children over the age of 12.
hombres, mujeres y niños de más de 12 años.
They were marched into the frozen wasteland
Marcharon sobre los páramos congelados,
where the firing squads were waiting for them.
donde los escuadrones, pelotones de fusilamiento,
And they were shot.
y fueron fusilados.
As they marched to their death, they sang the International.
Según iban hacia su muerte, cantaban la Internacional.
And as they faced their executioners,
Y según estaban de frente a sus ejecutores,
they cried out their defiance.
gritaron de forma desafiante:
Long live Comrade Trotsky.
¡Viva el compañero Trotsky!
Long live Lenin.
¡Viva Lenin!
Long live the October Revolution.
¡Viva la Revolución de Octubre!
And despite all these terrible blows,
A pesar de estos dos terribles golpes,
Trotsky remained absolutely firm in his revolutionary ideas.
Trotsky permaneció totalmente firme en sus ideas revolucionarias.
Trotsky's marvelously moving testament, reveals his enormous optimism in the socialist future of humanity. But the net was now closing inexorably. In March 1939, Pavel Sudoplatov, an officer of the NKVD, the secret police, was unexpectedly called into the office of Stalin in the Kremlin. And Stalin personally put him in charge of the assassination of Trotsky. He wanted the job done, and he wanted it done quickly. Now, one of the factors that undoubtedly played a role in hastening the assassination was the fact that Stalin found out that Trotsky was working on a biography of Stalin. Stalin was Trotsky's last work. And in my opinion, it's one of the greatest Marxist masterpieces. It is a profound analysis of the forces that led to the degeneration of the October Revolution. And it is also unique in Marxist literature. As a fascinating study of the ways in which the peculiar character of an individual his personal traits and psychology interacted with great events. But for Stalin, this was not a book of Marxist theory. This book was dynamite. I repeat what I said before. That Stalin, as a criminal, wanted to eliminate all witnesses. And Trotsky was the most dangerous witness of all. Esteban Volkov has no doubt whatever that Stalin wanted to prevent the publication of this book at all costs. And he recalls how every day, Sheldon Hart, the Stalinist agent who'd infiltrated into Trotsky's guards, would pester the secretary who was typing the book anxiously asking how it was going. That was no accident, of course. And on August the 20th, 1940, Stalin finally got what he wanted. an agent of the GPU,
agente de la GPU,
Ramon Mercader, alias Jackson,
Ramón Mercader, alias Jackson,
succeeded in penetrating the Trotsky household under false pretenses.
consiguió penetrar en el hogar de Trotsky bajo falso pretexto.
He persuaded Trotsky to read an article that he had allegedly written,
Persuadió a Trotsky para que leyese un artículo que supuestamente había escrito
and as Trotsky was reading it,
y según lo estaba leyendo,
Mercader stood behind him,
Mercader estaba detrás de él,
raised his arm,
levantó su brazo
and brought it down with full force,
y lo echó con toda la fuerza,
driving an ice pick through the skull of a defenseless man.
atravesando hundiendo un piolet en la cabeza de este gran hombre indefenso,
Shattering the brain of the greatest living Marxist,
haciendo pedazos al cerebro del más grande marxista que vivía
and destroying one of the finest minds that history has known.
y destruyendo una de las mentes mejores que haya conocido la historia.
But the story does not end there.
Pero la historia no termina ahí.
And here I must pay a personal tribute to my old friend and comrade Esteban Volkov.
Y aquí tengo que hacer un tributo personal a mi viejo amigo y compañero Esteban Volkov,
Trotsky's grandson and the last surviving witness of the events of that dramatic and tragic day.
el nieto de Trotsky y el último superviviente de los acontecimientos de aquel día tan trágico.
Those events have remained with him for the rest of his life.
Sus acontecimientos le han quedado grabados para el resto de su vida.
And he has spent his entire life fighting to defend the ideas of Trotsky and to defend the historical truth.
Y él ha dedicado toda su vida a luchando para defender las ideas de Trotsky y defender la verdad histórica.
A very important part of that struggle was to maintain the Trotsky Museum.
Una parte muy importante de esa lucha fue la de mantener el Museo de Trotsky,
which has deservedly gained a colossal fame and international prestige.
que muy merecidamente ha ganado una fama colosal y prestigio internacional.
This museum is justly proud of its role in preserving the heritage of the great revolutionary Lev Davidovich Trotsky.
Este museo puede estar orgulloso por defender el legado de ese gran revolucionario ruso Lev Davidovich Trotsky,
Preserving these things for the new generation of revolutionaries all over the world.
conservando para las ideas y el legado para las nuevas generaciones de revolucionarios del futuro.
At a time when the revolutionary youth in many countries are tearing down the statues of the old oppressors,
En el momento en que la juventud revolucionaria en muchos países está derribando las estatuas de los viejos opresores,
we must do everything in our power to defend those monuments to the revolutionary past that still remain.
nosotros tenemos que hacer todo lo posible para defender aquellos monumentos del pasado revolucionario que siguen de pie.
Sad to say, there are not many of them left.
Es triste decir que no quedan muchos.
But surely the most important and impressive is precisely the Casa Museo Leon Trotsky in Mexico.
Pero seguro que es el más importante e impresionante es la Casa Museo de Trotsky en México.
Under the direction of Gabriela Pérez Noriega, it's gone from strength to strength.
Bajo la dirección de Gabriela Pérez Noriega ha ido fortaleciéndose cada vez más.
Gabriela has put together a very fine and dedicated team who have done an outstanding job
Creado un equipo que está excelente, que está llevando un trabajo impresionante,
improving the museum beyond recognition in the past few years.
mejorando el museo más allá de ser reconocido en los últimos años.
But these workers and their families have to be paid, they have to eat.
Estos trabajadores y sus familias hay que pagarles.
And as long as the museum remains closed, where's the money to come from?
Y tanto en cuanto que el museo continúe cerrado, ¿de dónde va a venir el dinero?
Esteban has pointed out that the museum finds itself in a very difficult and precarious position.
Esteban Volkov ya ha señalado que el museo se encuentra en una situación muy precaria y muy delicada.
The situation is very serious.
La situación es muy grave.
An injection of funds is urgently needed to ensure the future of this priceless monument.
Y hace falta una inyección de dinero para preservar este futuro.
And therefore, we are asking you today to make a sacrifice to save this remarkable museum for posterity.
Por eso, nosotros os pedimos hoy que hagáis un sacrificio para preservar este museo para la posteridad.
Comrades and friends, action is needed urgently. That is to say, right now, in fact.
Compañeros y amigos, hace falta ayuda, acción urgente ahora mismo.
So we are asking you to dig deep in your pockets and donate as much as you can.
Estamos pidiendo que seáis generosos, que rasquéis el bolsillo y que donéis
In-
tanto como sea posible,
In the certain knowledge that every cent that is raised today
sabiendo que con la seguridad de que cada centavo que se consiga hoy
will go to a very good cause,
será destinado a una causa buena,
the preservation of the Trotsky Museum.
en la conservación del Museo Trotsky.
Now, I'm sure that you will respond
Estoy seguro de que responderé
generously,
generosamente
and with your help, the museum will be saved.
y con vuestra ayuda el museo se salvará.
But let us return for a moment
Volvamos por un momento
to the events of that fateful day in the summer of 1940.
los acontecimientos de aquel fatídico día en el verano de 1940.
When Stalin heard the news, I have no doubt that he would have been very pleased with himself.
Cuando Stalin oyó las noticias, no tengo duda de que hubiera estado muy complacido consigo mismo.
He thought he'd solved the problems, but the same means that he solved all problems.
Que había resuelto el problema por la misma manera en que resolvía todos los problemas,
By the employment of brute force.
empleando la fuerza bruta.
That really is not such a difficult thing to do if you think about it.
Eso, si lo pensáis, eso no es realmente algo tan complicado.
But there's one thing that the vulgar empiric Stalin could never understand.
Pero hay una cosa que el vulgar empírico Stalin no podía comprender:
The power of ideas.
el poder de las ideas.
You know, we humans are weak and fragile animals.
Nosotros, los humanos, somos animales débiles y frágiles.
We can be disposed of by anything, a bullet, a knife, an ice pick.
Podemos ser destruidos con cualquier cosa, una bala, un cuchillo, un piolet.
Yes, it's easy to kill a man or a woman,
Es difícil matar a un hombre o a una mujer,
but it is impossible to kill an idea whose time has come.
pero es imposible matar una idea cuyo tiempo ha llegado.
Comrades, today,
Compañeros, hoy,
80 years after the death of Trotsky, we are still here. Yes, yes, comrades, we are still here. And Leon Trotsky lives on today
Trotsky continúa viviendo
in each and every one of us.
en todos y cada uno de nosotros.
His whole life was entirely devoted to the cause of the working class and international socialism.
Su vida entera fue dedicada a la causa de la clase obrera y al socialismo.
And his real testament lives on. It lives on today.
El auténtico testamento sigue
You can find Leon Trotsky in all his books and all his other writings, which continue to be a treasure house of Marxist ideas to this very day. Marvelous ideas, marvelous books, imperishable books like The Revolution Betrayed, In Defense of Marxism and Stalin. These are a vital part of the arsenal of Marxism today. And this is where our strength lies. It is this and nothing else that gives us the strength and inspiration that will enable us to carry on the fight that started so long ago and bring this fight to a victorious conclusion. Comrades, long live Leon Trotsky. Long live the World Socialist Revolution. Workers of the world unite.
Well, I'd like to thank Alan, who's the editor of Marxist.com, for that excellent contribution. I think this event has been extremely important for the legacy of Trotsky. But before we close, I'd like to make a couple of points. First of all, organizational one, that to draw your attention once again to the offer from well-read books of all Trotsky's books being reduced by 25%. And also a further reminder that today you can still give to the Trotsky Museum, the appeal. I'm pleased to announce that we've raised over £3,000 so far. I think it's a good start, and surely there's a lot more that can be raised itself.
Pincha aquí y pone mute.
In conclusion, we will keep the ideas and memory of Leon Trotsky alive. But the world crisis of capitalism is producing or preparing the ground for world revolution. But as Trotsky explained in 1938, that the crisis facing mankind is a crisis of leadership. And leadership cannot be improvised. It has to be built now. And this is what the IMT is doing. I quote the words of Trotsky in 1938. There never was a greater task on the earth. Upon every one of us rests a tremendous historical responsibility. And that situation remains the case today. even more so. And therefore, I will appeal to you, if you've not joined the IMT, consider joining the IMT today. To build the genuine forces of Marxism on a world scale. And as is traditional in all our meetings, we'd like to end with a rendition of the Internationale. And therefore, please play the video. Thank you, comrades.
The center of the world. It is foolish to hope that Europe, as it is, his trials developed not from communism, not from socialism, but from Stalinism. That is from the irresponsible despotism of the bureaucracy over the people.